welcome to the Clash of the Titans. This video is going to basically be about my Mac G4, which I got cheap a while back and haven't really ever done anything with Macs of this generation. I've got a couple of older ones which, to be quite honest, were deeply uninspiring and tedious to work with, so I'm hoping this one's going to be a bit better. And I've just sort of amassed a few bits and pieces over the last couple of months, and now I'm ready to put it together. But this is a 450 megahertz Power Mac G4, and I just happen to have a 450 megahertz slot 1 Pentium III, so I thought it'd be interesting to compare two computers that would probably have been available at the same time with similar specs, but possibly deceivingly so, which we'll find out about shortly. It's not anything like as even a match as it ought to be, but I thought it'd still be a bit of fun to have a look. So looking around this, it has to be said this is a beast of a case. I don't know if I like the design, but it's certainly striking. And you can see it's a bit scuffed because of all this shiny, transparent plastic they put on there. So I'm hoping to polish that out at some point. It's not too bad, but it's a funny color scheme. It's kind of drab, I think, and it's kind of industrial looking, but kind of arty-farty at the same time. Don't really know whether I like it or not. It is striking, you have to say that, and it's certainly very different to the beige PCs you were getting at the time. So we see familiar stuff: USB ports, zip drives, DVD drives, Ethernet ports, which is nice, and normal sort of kettle lead. Unlike my other Macs, which had all sorts of nasty proprietary rubbish going on, and this one is all fairly familiar on the outside. So when you open it, and this is the best thing about this, it just opens. The side of the case just opens. Instant access to everything. No screws, no faffing about like you do with the PC. All cases should be designed to open like this. On the inside, and this is what kind of made me think it might be a nice little comparison to do with the Pentium III, there's a lot of things that are similar. Obviously, the fundamental architecture is radically different, and therefore, just because the numbers are the same does not mean that it's going to run at the same speed. But yeah, to start with, we've got a 450 megahertz Power PC 7400, which is in this kind of daughter board thing that plugs into the motherboard underneath this whopping big silver heatsink. Same as the Pentium III again, it's got a bus speed of 100 megahertz and it takes PC 100 RAM, so I'll be using the same RAM in both machines when I do this little test. It's got 64 kilobytes of level 1 cache and 1 megabyte of level 2 cache. We've got a bunch of PCI slots and an AGP slot, AGP 2 slot, so that is the same as the 440BX board that the Pentium 3 is in as well. The differences with this is the graphics card is a Rage 128 Pro, but it's only a 16 megabyte version, whereas the ones in my PCs are all 32 megabytes, I think. So here we've got some PC 100 RAM, which we'll use later in the Pentium 3 as well. There's a whole gig here, but we'll just be using 512 in each machine for this. And then there's two graphics cards here. The one on the left is the one that came with the machine, and that is a DVI Rage 128 Pro. And the one on the right is Apple's own proprietary ADC connector, and that is also a Rage 128 Pro. The one on the left's got a seized fan. The one on the right I bought because I also managed to get a cheap, untested ADC monitor, and I wanted to see if I could get it working. I also bought this off eBay because it has the same fan as the one that's seized on the Rage 128 Pro. I didn't even look at this card. I got it for, I think it was £20, and yeah, it's a Radeon. It's a Radeon DDR, so I'm not taking the fan off that, and I'll be keeping it. So what I'm going to do is use the ADC card for this build. I don't believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe that Apple fully implemented the AGP standard. This is a 3.3 volt AGP slot, so it's AGP 1, I think, and they did some weird stuff with the pins. Apparently, and this is something I do plan to do in the future because I think it'll be quite fun, you can turn a PC graphics card into a Mac graphics card. So originally you would have bought what was called a Mac edition, which has a different ROM and a different pinout to a PC card. But if you get a PC card, you can flash the ROM, and you can also cut or mask the pins that the Apple doesn't need. So I'm kind of wondering about maybe doing a Voodoo 3 at some point, because I have 3 Voodoo 3s and I could probably spare one to work in a Mac. Okay, everything's in there that we need. We've got our 512 megabytes of RAM, the graphics card's in place, so we can close it up and plug in the monitor and see what happens. So this is an ADC monitor I got, cheap and untested, so we'll find out if it works in a moment. This is a single cable solution, so it plugs into the ADC port on the graphics card, and that provides power and graphics all down the same cable. So that's, I guess, a deviation to the AGP standard that Apple made as well. Well, it sure looks funky altogether, but there's no power coming into this thing at all. No green light on the power switch, no picture on the screen, so that's a bit of a shame. I think we're just going to have to go back to using VGA. Okay, so we've got our trusty 19-inch VGA monitor from HP. No funky Apple things going on here, just a big square thing. No style whatsoever, but very functional. So we're going to load the restore discs that I got on eBay for this machine, so that should make things easy. And we'll load them into this very funky thing I forgot to mention. So the DVD player on here is actually a DVD RAM drive. DVD RAM was when they first were trying to come up with the standard for the DVD sort of system. Don't know which body sort of rules it. They went through the same thing with CDs. There's a bunch of companies submitted different ideas, and one of them was DVD RAM, which didn't get chosen, so it's not the DVDs that we're familiar with now. It's a cartridge-based system, and it's very, very flexible. You can just write and delete as you would onto a floppy disk, basically. So it's a funky thing. It takes normal DVDs as well, which you kind of slot into this really funky tray loading mechanism thing, and then it takes the cartridge ones as well. I did buy some cartridge ones I was hoping to show, but unfortunately I bought, I think they're 9 gigabyte double-sided DVD cartridges I bought, and this machine can only read the, I think it's 5 gigabyte ones or something like that. So I'll have to try and get some of those at some point, but there'll be a super easy way to back things up off this machine and keep things safe. So when this comes up, it literally just boots from the CD, and it's super, super simple. It just loads up everything for you. So I guess that's one of the things that Apple was notorious for, was making things idiot-proof, basically. Sometimes a bit too idiot-proof, which we'll go into a bit later, but certainly getting the thing up and running is so simple. It was all up and running pretty smoothly, and I was itching to get a game up and running on this machine. A machine of this spec, and you know, it's been, I have to say, a pleasure to use so far. So I've got a load of PC games that also have Mac versions on them, and Blizzard seems to be particularly good at this. So I've got 3 Blizzard games here, and they all have Mac versions that will run on this machine. So I'm going to load up Warcraft 3 and maybe StarCraft and just see what they look like. Okay, so time to think about how to compare this machine with the Pentium. And it's not an easy thing to do. It's not like you can just load up 3D Mark on here, because you can't, because there isn't a Mac version. And it was difficult to find benchmarking tools. In fact, I only found one, and that's a thing called Cinebench, which I've never used before, but that will run on this machine, and it will also run on the Pentium III on Windows 98, so we're going to use that. I did load Warcraft 3, but that's probably not a great choice because it really wants a 500 megahertz processor, so I'm going to replace it with StarCraft, which is the least demanding of the 3 games I've got, I think. So that will also be used just to get a general feel for gameplay, to see if there's any noticeable difference, or if one machine is indeed better than the other, just from a sort of user viewpoint. The other thing I'm going to do is load Unreal on each of these machines, not Unreal Tournament, just the original one, and do some benchmarking with that, because that will run and give us a frame rate on each machine. And then I was trying to think, I thought that was not much to be benchmarking with. So the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to load up Photoshop, old version, version 6, and I'm just going to load a 4K image and time it to see how quickly each machine can render that image in Photoshop. And I thought, yeah, it's just a basic little benchmark. As I said, you know, it's just a bit of fun, really. But I don't want to get any aggro going between the PC and Mac fanboys, because, you know, I'll end up in fisticuffs. Okay, let the contest begin. So we're going to start with Unreal, and I'm going to run it at 3 resolutions, 640 by 480, 800 by 600, and 1024 by 768. I'm only going to do this in 16-bit color, and I'm going to turn everything as high as I can in the game settings here. So this is an assumption as well, being new to Macs. Obviously we have no Direct 3D, so I think it kind of uses Direct 3D wrappers and it calls it Rave. I'm just guessing here because we don't want to be using software and we don't want to be using Glide, so that only leaves one option. So I'm guessing Rave support is their sort of version of what we would have as Direct 3D in a Windows PC. So that's what we're going to set up, and then we'll just let the game go and we'll see what the frame rates come back as. So there it is, the first results are in and they are pretty damn respectable, to be honest. So 53 frames a second, 640 by 480, 43 at 800 by 600, and 1024 by 768, and almost playable 29 as well. So gotta say, it looks good, and it does. It feels damn weird looking at these games on a completely different machine that isn't a PC, but yeah, that's not a bad performance at all. So on to Cinebench. Cinebench is just a short little benchmark. It only takes about 5 minutes to run, and it just does lots of kind of geometry and shading and ray tracing, and it uses OpenGL. It also uses its own software to run the same things, and then does a comparison at the end. And this is probably not so much hammering the graphics card as is running on the processor and possibly using this fancy extra maths stuff that is built into this machine. So let's see how it does with this. And at the end, it generates a little set of statistics. So you've got shading using Cinema 4D, that is Cinebench's built-in shading algorithm, and it gives a score of 4.71. And then you've got shading using OpenGL, and that gives a score of 6.11. I don't know if these are seconds or some other measuring way that they use. And then we've got ray tracing on a single CPU, because it handles multiple CPUs as well. And some of these Macs could have multiple CPUs. I believe you could get dual core ones of these, or dual processor, I should say. But the ray tracing score was 5.8, and then it gives you a diff between the OpenGL and its own algorithm, and OpenGL is 1.3 times faster on this machine. So what that means right now is probably not much, but it might give us an idea of which of these two machines is the most performant when we run it on the Pentium. And then the final benchmark, and by far the most scientific one, is load this 4K image in Photoshop 6 and time it with a stopwatch, which I did several times, and then kind of averaged out how long it took to load the image. And on the Mac, it took 4.82 seconds. It took a little while, so yeah, it was a bit of a test, but that pretty much wraps it up for all of my measurable benchmarks. So the last test I did was just to load up StarCraft and have a bit of a play. A game I've not played. I bought it because I wanted to, but I haven't got around to playing it on the PC yet. But yeah, this looks like it's going to be a lot of fun. But this is the thing I mentioned earlier, where Apple's kind of idea of going crazy on making things simple to use sort of kicks them in the nuts, because one button mouse for gaming is just insane. It's just utterly stupid. You know, you want 3 buttons at least. Like a modern gaming mouse got buttons all over it. So, you know, when by this time Microsoft was sort of handling scroll wheel mice, so you had 3 buttons and a scroll wheel and, you know, 1 button. And so on this thing, it seems you have to hold control down and then click the 1 button, and that's the same as a right mouse click. And how is that simpler? So it really is kind of painful. I was using the arrow keys to move around and things like that. It was just a pain in the arse, to be quite honest. But graphics wise, it's superb. So I hope there's a solution to that crazy mouse problem. But yeah, it's going to be fun playing on this, because there's a lot of games for it and it's a nice experience and it looks good. So another proper gaming machine of a computer, I think. Anyway, on to the Pentium.
For the first time in history, a personal computer has been classified as a weapon by the U.S. government. With the power to perform over 1 billion calculations per second, the Pentagon wants to ensure that the new Power Macintosh G4 does not fall into the wrong hands. As for Pentium PCs, well, they're harmless.
Yeah, I think that advert was made because somehow the Apple G4 found its way onto a banned export list to certain countries, so it couldn't be exported to places like Iran for being technology that they shouldn't have. But by this point in time, it was a bit of a joke because they hadn't changed the specs of the export list since it was first conceived. And at that time, a machine like this would have been a supercomputer, but by the time it actually came onto the market, it was nothing, and they should have been allowed to export them anywhere, really. But anyway, they're called Pentiums useless, and here's a useless Pentium, harmless even. So this is my tiny P3 450. So it's a Cat9 core, and it's on an Intel 440BX chipset, and it has the same sort of spec, 2x AGP and PC100 RAM. So I've stolen 512K out of the Mac to put in here. We've got the 128 Pro in here as well, but the PC version is a 32 megabyte version, also AGP4, so I don't know why the Mac one is kind of so weird with its 16 megabytes of memory and presumably designed for AGP2, I don't know. But we're just going to crack on and do the benches, so straight away let's get going with Unreal. The results of this surprised me. I was expecting something a little bit closer, but at 640 by 480, this only averaged 30 frames a second. 800 by 600, it was 22 frames a second, and 1024 by 768, it was 14.5. So really, here you're looking at, I don't know, sort of 23 frames a second slower at 640 by 480, nearly half the speed, 20 odd frames slower at 800 by 600, and half the speed again at 1024 by 768. So it's almost like this PC is kicking out half the frame rate of the Mac. So who knows? So next up we've got Cinebench, and this came in at the shading for the Cinema 4D algorithm was 4.35. The shading for OpenGL was 5.72. The ray tracing score was 4.4, and that gave a ratio between OpenGL and Cinema 4D's shading that OpenGL is 1.32 times faster. So in Cinebench, the scores were closer. So I believe higher scores are better here. And shading in Cinema 4D, we got 4.35 on the Pentium III, which is pretty close to the G4's 4.71. And for OpenGL, we got 5.72, which again is pretty close to the 6.11 on the G4. And the ray tracing score was 4.4, which was a lot slower than the 5.8 on the G4. That might have something to do with its super mathematical capabilities, I'm not sure. But yeah, they were a bit closer, but overall it is looking like the PC is slower. So running this non-scientific stopwatch test on loading the 4K image in Photoshop, the PC gets a win. Yay! The PC did it in about 2.5 seconds repeatedly, as opposed to just under 5 seconds for the Mac. So, you know, whatever's going on there, but the rendering in Photoshop on the PC seems considerably faster than it is on the Mac. So that's it for the benchmarking. We're just going to play a little bit of StarCraft now to see if there's any noticeable differences, but it wasn't a good day for the PC. Let's just say that there were so many variables here with the hardware, the motherboard, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, it does. I was surprised about the Unreal benchmarks because I would expect that to be a close run thing, but you just have no idea what ATI did to the cards, how much effort they put into tuning them for the Mac, and when they did the port of Unreal to the Mac, how much of the new bits of technology did they use for that. You just don't know, but it was a fun little comparison nevertheless. Well, that's it. That's pretty much the end of the experiment. I've got to say, it wasn't what I was expecting, as I was actually expecting it to be a pretty close run thing, which it kind of was up to a point, but Unreal, the Mac was going twice as fast as the Pentium III. And I did actually put in a Voodoo 3 just to see if there wasn't anything really wrong with that graphics card. I mean, this is the Rage 128 I used in the last video, so it should be performing as it's designed to. And I ran the same benches with the Voodoo 3 and they gave similar, slightly slower results. So I guess on this machine, that's the ballpark. And there are a million reasons why the Mac might be faster. It could be tuned hardware, it could be tuned software, it could just be all the extra bells and whistles on the processor, but there's no real way of finding out. But it was a fun little experiment anyway. So yeah, I had fun doing it. I will continue using this machine. I do like it. I think it's a lot of fun and there's a lot of good games to be played on it also. So it's going to be a keeper. I guess that's pretty much it. I hope you enjoyed this mad experiment as much as I did. And I hope you join me for the next crazy experiment. That'll probably be something really boring next time. But thanks for watching and I hope to see you next time.
SCBs at a command center.
Hostile territory, and you want us to defend ourselves, then use the attack command. But if you want us to ignore enemy fire and go exactly to the spot you targeted, then use the move command. Now, which will it be?
Magistrate, our stockpile of minerals has run out. Select an SCV and use the gather command on the crystals to collect more minerals.
Yes, sir. Right away, sir. Yes, sir. Right away, sir. Commander, rock and roll. Go, go, go. Rock and roll. Let's move. Outstanding. Go, go, go. Let's move. Rock and roll.
Your forces are under attack.
Jacked up and good to go. Rock and roll. Outstanding. Rock and roll. Go, go, go. Let's move. Outstanding. Rock and roll. Go, go, go.